Before our break, we were looking at Joshua chapter 17, and specifically the dividing of the land to the tribe of Manasseh. We had some things to say about Joseph being represented twice, his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and we talked about back in Genesis 48, Jacob blessing both of those sons, and blessed the younger over the older, and yet said both of them would prosper and would be renowned in Israel. And he predicted that would happen when they dwelt in the land. Now they're in the land, and they're dividing up that portion of property. And then there's some significant things that happen in this division of land that lets us know how detailed God is in keeping His promise, and how even though time has passed, it doesn't affect God's promise nor what Moses had pronounced. When we get to chapter 17, verse 3, it said in reference to one of the descendants of Manasseh, Zelophehad, the son of Epher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh. So it traces him back to Manasseh. He had no sons but daughters. And these are the names of his daughters: Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. And so if you and your wife are still having children and you run out of names, here's your list of choices that you don't hear a lot of today. And be quite unique. At least some of these are not ones that we would put high on our list probably, but these are all daughters now. But the significant thing is he had no sons. And obviously the inheritance divided up according to tribes, according to families, and the heads of those families would be represented in the male members. And this particular descendant of Manasseh had no sons. And so they came near unto Eleazar the priest, and before Joshua the son of Nun. Remember we said Eleazar represented the spiritual side, the religious side of things, and Joshua the civil side of things. So he'd come before both of them, and before the princes. Remember we said represented each tribe, and the elders, the fathers, and saying, the Lord God commanded Moses. See, they haven't forgotten, and they assume these men haven't forgotten, and they certainly assume God hasn't forgotten. It said, the Lord God commanded Moses to give us an inheritance among our brethren. Therefore, according to the commandment of the Lord, He gave them an inheritance among the brethren of their fathers. And this goes back to Numbers chapter 27, when they had come before Moses. Moses predicted ahead of time, you're going into the land, you're going to divide it up. And they said, okay. Our father doesn't have any male descendants. And they asked for an inheritance. And Moses promised such. So that's carried out. Again, why would the Holy Spirit record such a thing? To let us know that God doesn't forget anything. And He keeps His promise right down to the minute detail. And when all the hustle and bustle of dividing land comes up, that's not left out. So they divide that portion of land up and include in that these daughters as those who should inherit the land. So interesting to see these 5 daughters and them taking the initiative to make that request, and Moses granting such. And now that promise being kept. They came to the right source, the leaders, Joshua and Eleazar, and the heads, the witnesses, the heads of the tribes, and they remind them of what had already been decided. That was carried out. Verse 7 through 18, it describes for us a failure of sorts. That as these coasts are described, the different borders of the land that was given to Manasseh. It described for us that they were unable to drive them out, drive out their enemies. Notice it said, let me find my place here. Verse 12, yet the children of Manasseh could not drive out the inhabitants of those cities, but the Canaanites would dwell in that land. When you go back up to verse 10 of chapter 16, they drove out the Canaanites, but they didn't destroy them. They made them servants. And now you have Manasseh unable to drive out those that lived in their cities. Why is that? It came to pass when the children of Israel waxed strong that they put the Canaanites to tribute. Here we are again. But did not utterly drive them out. Because they could not physically do it. Or because they chose not to do it. We had a brief discussion during the break about what some of the motives might be, and maybe one of the considerations might have been that with so much fighting and so much bloodshed that people grow weary in that part of it. And so even though they had the power to drive them out, they might just get sickened of taking lives. And I don't remember specifically that being addressed as one of the reasons, but we would know from a human vantage point that you could grow weary in that. But we don't have a choice. They didn't have a choice. Well, let me reword that. They always had choices. That they're going to be pleasing to God, and God was going to bless them. They didn't have but one choice. And that was to do what God said do, and He said drive them out. Are they driving them out? The answer is no. They grew strong, it said, and they waxed strong, and they put them in tribute. Now, if you can force somebody into tribute, are they a threat to you? Not at that moment. You can do with them what you like. And so they choose to make them servants. So I think probably the motive from what we see in both of these contexts with Ephraim and Manasseh is that they already have land. They have their families there. They're no doubt planting vineyards and making things livable. And now you've got to stop those activities and finish the job. And it's kind of difficult to force yourself to stop, isn't it? You can say, well, look, that could be helpful to us. And help us with our task. And, as long as they are not a threat to us, and as long as we control them, hey, they can help us plant our vineyards. Or we'll let them stay in a particular section of our land, and they're going to pay us tribute, and we're going to prosper monetarily. So we can reason it out a lot of different ways, but the underlying commandment of God to begin with was, you're going to utterly drive them out and destroy them. And He said you cannot make leagues or agreements with them. What is putting someone in tribute? Is that making a league with them?
Yeah.
It's an agreement with them. God said you don't do that. You don't take their daughters for wives for your son. You don't give your daughters to be wives to their son. But you can see if you left these people alive and you had association with them, you're increasing the opportunity for such things to happen. And we'll see in the history of the Israelite people that did happen. So the children of Joseph spake unto Joshua, saying, why hast thou given me but one lot and one portion to inherit it, seeing I am a great people, for as much as the Lord hath blessed me hitherto? And Joshua answered them, if thou be a great people, then get thee up to the wood country, and cut down for thyself there in the land of the Perizzites, and of the giants, and in Mount Ephraim, if Ephraim be too narrow for thee. And the children of Joseph said, now who were the children of Joseph? Ephraim and Manasseh. And the children of Joseph said, the hill is not enough for us. all the Canaanites that dwell in the land of the valley have chariots of iron. Now we get some insight. They have chariots of iron, both they who are of Beth-shean and her town, and they who are of the valley of Jezreel. And Joshua spake unto the house of Joseph, even unto Ephraim and Manasseh, saying, Thou art a great people, hast great power, and thou shalt not have one lot only, but the mountain shall be thine. For it is a wood, and thou shalt cut it down, and the outgoing of it shall be thine. For thou shalt drive out the Canaanites, though they have iron chariots, and though they be strong. What do you see here in this leader, Joshua? What's he reminding this people of? Why do they say we don't have enough land? Well, the land that the people have been driven out of, not enough room. And they know that other land's there. And when he acknowledges it's there, they said, yeah, but there are folks already living there. Does Joshua not already know that?
Joshua's saying if you want it, you go get it.
That's it. And what do they say? Why hadn't they gone and gotten it? They said, even that won't be enough. Why? There are people already living there. Not supposed to be. Not supposed to be the people living there. That's the wrong excuse. And notice he said, they acknowledge that the Perizzites are there. Joshua said they're there, but they're not supposed to be. Did God not mention the Perizzites in Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy? Not been mentioned multiple times already in the book of Joshua, saying they're in the land. So is this news? No, it's not news. He's just saying, okay, we know they're there. Now you go drive them out. They said, but they got iron chariots. Have they faced anybody thus far with iron chariots? What did God tell them to do?
Hamstring the horse.
All right, you go rock those horses. You going to have the men pulling the chariots, or you going to have the horses pulling the chariots? Horses. What happens when you cut the tendons on the back of the horse's leg?
Useless.
Can't pull a chariot. Have they been told that before? Have they done that before?
Yes.
Why do you think the first thing ought to come to mind? So what? They've got chariots. When they go to sleep, we're going to hawk the horses.
Yeah.
When do you think that? They're not thinking that way. It's always a tendency when we prosper for us to get lazy. Isn't it kind of a tendency of ours that when we prosper, we get lazy? We even forget how we became prosperous. You hard work and you reach a certain, status in life, and you build a nice house and you get a nice car, and then you start taking it easy, and then if you want more prosperity, or we're having a push at the congregation where we work saying, we're going to take on this missionary, and all of us are going to be challenged to give a little more. So, I don't give any more. Why? Because that means work. I don't want to work anymore. We kind of start thinking that way. So we ought to put our minds in the place of these folks and say, same thing happened to them. God had been fighting with them and for them, and He identified those people in the land. He said, that land is yours, and I will. You remember back over in chapter 13 and verse 6. And all the inhabitants of the hill country from Lebanon, the Sidonians, and then I'm looking for the last part of the verse, I think. God said, them will I drive out from before the children of Israel. Only divide thou it by lot unto the Israelites for an inheritance, as I have commanded thee. God said, I'm going to drive them out. But who are they doubting here when they say, we can't do it, they got chariots? Who are they really insulting? God. Saying, well, I know you said we could drive them out, but these people are powerful, they're strong. Well, they shouldn't have been. And they're certainly not stronger than God. He'll take care of them if you'll go up and take care of it, take care of business the way He told you to. So Joshua doesn't cut him much slack, does he? Mm-hmm. He said, I told you where the land is. And yes, there are folks there. We already do that. And so go up and take it. You need more land? You are great people. Can't deny that. There is more land. Can't deny that. There are people who live there. Can't deny that. So what are you going to do? you want more land, you're going to go drive the people out. Pretty simple solution, isn't it? And so it's up to them. Here's the choice. The Canaanites, dwell in the southwest of the Sea of Galilee, and they had iron chariots. Well, if they're still alive and they are functioning enough to be building chariots, it tells me that the Israelites have just really become complacent. When we mention those 5 Philistine lords, they will be defeated multiple times, and they'll be driven back to a certain area of the land of Palestine, but each time they'll reconstitute. Each time they'll get strong again. Mm-hmm. And so when the war stopped, they were going from city to city, and they've been successful, and even when they faced folks with iron chariots, they took care of the matter, and they utterly destroyed all of them. They were confident, and 31 kings fell one right after another, and now all of a sudden, same kind of enemy, same promise of God, same promise for that God to be with them, and yet they're looking at the enemy differently than they did when they were conquering the land, one city after another. When we get to chapter 18, the whole congregation of children of Israel assembled together, and this is the altar that's built at Jordan that causes a stir. But the congregation of children of Israel assembled together at Shiloh, and they set up the tabernacle of the congregation there, and the land was subdued before them. So subdued is a little different than driving out, isn't it? When somebody's in tribute, they're subdued. And there remained among the children of Israel 7 tribes which had not received their inheritance. So Joshua pauses here and said unto the children of Israel, how long are ye slack? Go possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers hath given you. But why hadn't they partaken the land? They kind of stopped where they were and said, we're doing pretty well, and this is enough space presently. He said, give out from you 3 men for each tribe, and this is the action I told you about yesterday. And he sent them out through the land that they are left to inherit. And they divided into 7 parts, and he began to tell Judah where they're going to dwell, and the house of Joseph will abide at the coast. And then he sends these folks to kind of make a map that describes where the terrain is, what it is. And they'll be given that charge to measure the borders and to tell them where the hills are and where the water resources are, and so they bring all that back to Joshua, and he records a survey of the land. This is the first recorded survey in the Bible. And if you visit the Bureau of Land Management here, they have those topo maps, and they'll tell you where the mountains are, and valleys are, and forest is, and we think, boy, we're pretty sharp folks. Well, so are they. He said, you go and check out the land, you make me a map, and you describe it to me. And then when we divide the rest of this land up, they'll know what they're getting. They don't know what to expect. And so verse 8 and 9 describes that process of passing through the land and making that survey. Kind of like Lewis and Clark did in this nation. They go and come back and say, this is what it looks like. And so when people began to settle this country, they knew what they were settling. Joshua cast lots again for the land, and verse 11 through 28, assignment is made to Benjamin. Again, they're doing this by lot, and the lot of the tribe of the children of Benjamin came according to their families, and it tells us, where they were located between the children of Judah and the children of Joseph. That'd be Ephraim and Manasseh again, and so the general area that they would inhabit. When you get to verse 17, it said, and was drawn from the north and went to Enchemus and went forth toward Goliath, which is over against the going up of Aduman, and descended to the stone of Bohan and the son of Reuben. And so, again, it connects these tribes to each other, and it mentions specific places, and that'll become significant in your study of Hebrew history. These names will begin to take form, and these cities, as soon as you hear them, you'll know their general location, you know which tribe that particular land belongs to. In Shemesh here, in this context of verse 17, is where they practice sun worship. The word means fountain of the sun. And so people worship the sun here. Their moon god was called Nanak, N-A-N-A-K, N-A-N-N-A-K. And so idolatry existed throughout the land. And when they didn't drive the people out, guess what the people they left in the land did? They worshiped their God. Guess how the people of Israel got introduced to it? By watching them practice their idolatrous worship. And so, as it existed throughout the land, we began to be introduced to some places that'll cause us to remember what tribe owned this land. For instance, when you get to verse 24 and it mentions Geba. Geba was Gibeah, and Saul was born here. King Saul. What tribe was King Saul from? Now here the portion of land being divided up, and specific cities are being mentioned. You think, why would he take up the time and space and record for us these cities? Well, probably for a lot of reasons. But then when we get to selecting the first king, and he mentions Saul, the son of Kish, and mentions where he's from, and he said, I'm from the least tribe in Israel, and my family's the least in the tribe, and I am the smallest in my family. You get some idea about where they lived in the context of these folks. And verse 25 mentions Gibeon. And you remember this is where those 5 kings were beaten. They made that confederation and against Joshua. And this is where the sun stood still. Again, it gives you a perspective of where they were when all that took place, and now who inherits that land. When you get to verse 28, it mentions Zillah, and Zillah is where Saul and Jonathan were buried. When you read that in the last part of 1 Samuel and the first part of 2 Samuel about Saul and his son's death, then you can look back and say, I know the portion of land we're talking about, and it was given to Benjamin, and those specific names are mentioned. They don't go away. Chapter 19 is the assignment of Simeon and Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan. Simeon occupied the poorest section. And why did I tell you yesterday that was the case? You go back to Genesis chapter 49. Jacob is blessing and predicting the future of his children. in chapter 49 and verse maybe 7. Let's go back to verse 5. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are their habitation. O my soul, come not thou into their secret, under their assembly. Mine honor, be not thou united. But in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they digged down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath was cruel. And I will divide them in Jacob, and scatter them. You remember when you go back to chapter 34, and they caused the inhabitants of Shechem to be circumcised because Dinah was forced, and the son of Shechem there wanted to marry her, and they said, well, you can, but you're going to have to, everybody have to be circumcised. And while they were still sore, they Simeon and Levi went in and slew them. And so Jacob didn't forget that. He was shamed among the people, and that cruelty then brought reproach upon the name of God's people. And he didn't forget it. And so when you get here and you begin to geographically see what's divided to Simeon and his tribes, they get that southernmost part where there's just not a whole lot of quality land. And so again, God doesn't forget. And there was a certain amount of prophetic power given to the heads of those families. When they pronounced the blessing, it was a blessing. They pronounced the curse, it was a curse. And so he receives that curse. Specifically mentioned here is the area of Beersheba. And that, again, was a desert, desolate part of the land. And that was the portion given unto Simeon. And it was given to him out of the portion, it says, verse 9, out of the portion of children of Judah was the inheritance of the children of Simeon. So what did Jacob say? I'll divide them. And he pronounces that they'll have this, part of the children of Judah was too much for them. Therefore the children of Simeon had their inheritance within the inheritance of them. So they weren't, they didn't prosper very well. And the consequences of the sin of Simeon is recognized here in the curse that was pronounced upon him. In verse 13, it mentions a place by the name of Gath-Hepher. East of Gath-Hepher, it said. This was the birthplace of Jonah. So that'd be significant when you study about Jonah and being commissioned to go to Nineveh. So we have revealed to us a lot of things that become somewhat significant to us in a different setting, at a different time. If we kind of get that placed in our minds now, this is dividing up the land and mentioning the names of these places for a reason. Verse 18 mentions a place called Shunem. And here the Shunammite woman, you remember in 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 8, where Elisha raises her son? Again, it tells you the portion of land and who that belonged to and the tribal allotment. We won't read all the names of all the places, but it's kind of helpful to highlight some of those things that don't go away. And when you hear them again, you can kind of put them in context. For instance, in verse 26, it mentions that they're found my place there. It's talking about Asher's allotment, verse 24. Then verse 26 says it reached to Carmel, westward. And remember, Mount Carmel is where Elijah goes up and faces the prophets of Baal. Again, it tells you that's allotment given to Asher when the land is being divided. So when these prophets begin to prophesy, you kind of know where they're traversing the land and what the terrain might look like, because it's being described to us here. When we get to chapter 20, God makes a commandment that the children of Israel appoint cities of refuge. Again, that becomes significant because they'll be rehearsed a number of times in Israel's history and be used on occasion. These cities of refuge God wanted to have, so when someone were to kill a person, well, we'll just read what rehearses from what we learned in the book of Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. The Lord also spake unto Joshua, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, Appoint out of you cities of refuge, whereof I spake unto you by the hand of Moses. Again, this takes place in Exodus 21, verse 13, Numbers chapter 35 and verse 6, through verse 14, Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 2 through 9. But here's what is said concerning those cities, what their purpose was. That the slayer that killeth any person unawares, unwittingly, may flee hither, and they shall be your refuge from the avenger of blood. When he that doeth flee unto one of those cities shall stand in the entering of the gate of the city, he shall declare his cause in the ears of the elders of that city. And they shall take him into the city unto them, and give him a place that they may dwell among them. And if the avenger of blood pursue after him, then they shall not deliver the slayer unto his hand, because he smote his neighbors unwittingly, and hated him not beforetime. And he shall dwell in that city until he stand before the congregation for judgment, until the death of the high priest that shall be in those days. Then shall the slayer return, and come unto his own city, and unto his own house, unto the city from which he fled. And they appointed Kadesh in Galilee, and he begins to rehearse each of these cities and their location, not only in reference to the tribes, but in their geographical location, so they would be strategically placed, so everyone would have an opportunity to flee to a city of refuge. And so Kadesh is in Naphtali. Shechem is located in Ephraim. By the way, Kadesh means to set apart, and Shechem is located in Ephraim, and Shechem means to be ready, and Hebron is located in Judah, and Hebron means to be joined. And so those are the three cities on the west side of the Jordan. And then on the east side of the Jordan, it lists for us Bezer and Reuben. It means, Bezer means to constrain or enclose. And Ramoth in Gad, and Ramoth means high or exalted. And Golan, and it means passage. And Golan's located in Manasseh. We even hear sometimes in our news broadcasts of that part of the country with Israel and Syria, the Golan Heights. It kind of gives us a geographical mindset of where they're located. And so, what were these cities for again?
Refuge.
All right, cities of refuge. So they were strategically placed on each side of the river because the Israelites inhabited both sides of the river, and they were given those as an inheritance. And so when you go back to, let me see if I can find it before I spell it off. You ever have those moments? Yeah, I'll just those. These things being recorded on. If I say it wrong, it'll be wrong for a long time, won't it? If I correct it, they probably won't broadcast that the same way. Did you hear what Brother Martin said? Numbers chapter 35 and verse 15. We won't go back up and read that whole context. If you go back up to verse 9, it rehearses what we just read from Joshua, because Joshua rehearses what had been said through Moses about the cities of refuge. But when you get to verse 15, it says, "These 6 cities shall be a refuge, both for the children of Israel, and for the stranger, and for sojourners among them, that everyone that killeth any person unawares, unwittingly, may flee there." And so, think about that. All the way back when Moses stood alive and these things were being said, God set all that in order. And now, in a very methodical and meticulous way, they're not just dividing up the land, they're setting their religious and civil government in order. And this will involve both. And that is the civil function and also their religious function. You couldn't shed innocent blood, but what happens if you kill somebody and you didn't mean to? You know, the avenger of blood, the family member is going to be looking for you. So how are you going to survive? Well, you're going to find one of these cities of refuge, and you're going to call upon those who are official representatives to hear your cause. And if somebody comes looking for you there, they're not going to be allowed to take you, because God has set up and sanctioned these cities for that purpose. When you think about that, you know, God didn't just say that land's going to be yours and let them figure out how they're going to get it. He told them how they were going to possess the land, and He told them how they're going to behave when they got there. And what a blessing that is. You know, if God just told us, you know, I want you to live different than the world, but He didn't tell us how to live, that'd be difficult, wouldn't it? And if God said, you know, I'm going to bless you, but He doesn't tell us how He's going to bless us, that'd be difficult, wouldn't it? Or where He's going to bless us. And, you know, the city of refuge here is the church. God blessed us with all spiritual blessings in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. And so that's where we are to flee. And that's the only place where we can find refuge. And so that's what takes place in chapter 20, is the rehearsal of what would happen to those who kill somebody unknowingly. And those cities are listed in those particular locations. And these are the cities appointed by all the children, verse 9 of chapter 20 of Israel, for the strangers, for the sojourners among them, whosoever killeth any person unawares. Does it sound like anything you've heard? See, God doesn't forget what He said. And the people are not to forget what God said. And now they're having to pause and put all those things in place, because here they are. They're living there. Life is going to happen, isn't it? They need to have these things in order so when life happens, they'll know how to deal with it.
Brother Martin?
Yes.
You know, I was often wondering what kind of implications we get about God's will concerning capital punishment here. Because what we're seeing evidently is, you know, when somebody kills somebody else, there is a legal avenger that is in place as far as the family is concerned.
Right.
And he has a right to avenge the blood of whoever got killed. And it would make justice, it would serve justice. And these cities here of refuge is for the accidental slaying. But what I thought was so interesting, and I was wondering if you might agree with this, you know, today there's a popular idea about the liberal political liberals would be against capital punishment. One of their reasons was they would say because there can be an accidental execution of an innocent person. Well, doesn't God here recognize that that's possible? But that doesn't overrule the necessity of capital punishment.
That's exactly right. And if the God of heaven made provision for that, then what does that tell you about His attitude about an eye for an eye in that particular place? In the Old Testament, He's broke it down, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth, a life for life. And the avenger had the right to take a life,
Yeah, if
the
somebody,
life of a loved one was taken.
if somebody accidentally killed somebody and they were on their way to the city of refuge, but the avenger caught them first and killed them, the avenger would still be innocent.
Yeah.
And it would
You
be
had to make it, you had to make it to the city of refuge, you know, and that's why they were strategically located.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that negates the whole point that God made.
Beg pardon?
That would negate the entire point that God made. That if there is an accidental death, it was not predetermined or preconceived, He is making allowance for such a person. And I'm sure that He will ensure that that person gets to the place of refuge.
Well,
Well,
Because
maybe.
That's the God that we,
Well, but you have to be careful with that, Brother Joshua, because, we read where innocent folks are killed. David sends Uriah,
That's right.
an innocent man, to the front line with orders for the troops to be withdrawn. God didn't protect Uriah. Now he held David accountable for it. But he didn't protect Uriah. Life happens. God expects us to make application of the principles He's given us. Now, somebody could catch someone who's on their way to the city of refuge and know that that person was headed to the city of refuge and still go against God's will.
That's right.
There are folks who did things like that, and God didn't put a bubble around them. There were certainly other occasions where God had sent people on missions, and people tried to stop that mission, and God took care of that person because they were doing His mission. But He didn't protect everybody from everything. Why is that? Because He expects us to make application of the principle. Can I take somebody's life? I can. Can I take an innocent person's life? I can. Is God going to protect that innocent person from me? Not necessarily. But He's going to hold me accountable for it. You see, that's the key. So we have to be careful, or else anything that goes awry, we can blame God for it. So He didn't get him there safely. Why would He tell these people, these are the cities you set aside, these are the parameters you follow? Because He knew the propensity was, you're going to just react to the death of a loved one. And you're going to take the life for a life. And so there needs to be some way for a person to get where they need to be. But those are good discussions. They're interesting thoughts, but we have to be careful in that balance. God left this to them. For instance, God promised to be with them and He would defeat their enemies, but He allowed them, didn't He, to become slack? And He allowed them, didn't He, not to drive the people out? Well, what did He require of them? The consequences of that. He'd already told them what the consequences are going to be. If you get there and you don't drive them out, there are going to be thorns in your eyes. I'll see to it. There'll be thorns in your eyes, and they will turn and drive you out. But did He let them make that choice? He did. And so all along the way, when he set these parameters and these safeguards, it was dependent upon man keeping his part of it. God always expected man to meet His requirements. When they didn't, there were going to be consequences. Now, if you kill somebody unwittingly and said, it wasn't my fault, but I'm not going to make that trip to the city of refuge, I'm not going to leave my family, and I'm not going to stay there until the death of the high priest, well, then you take your chances.
So we're going to the impression that if the avenger meets the man on the way to the city of refuge, he should respect that and let him go? Or
Well, ideally, what each of us would do, they would have done, would be listen to what the person said. But when we put ourselves in those contexts, you know what happens first when somebody bothers my child? I'm going to deal with them bothering my child, and then I'm going to ask them why they were bothering my child.
Yeah.
The first thing I'm going to do is make sure they don't bother my child. You know why? Because that's my child, and I'm
That's right.
responding from that emotional
Right.
attachment
Yeah.
and where I am.
see, I was always under the impression that even if they met him on the way and killed and slew them there, they would still be innocent.
Well, I think in the context they'd have to be, or else you negate the reason for the city of refuge. If you don't make it to the city of refuge, you don't have refuge.
That's why they're told to don't go home and get your clothes. You better go there right now as fast
Well,
as you can get there.
And and I know this is being recorded, and I kind of hesitate
Yeah.
what I say, because you and I can reason through this, and you can say, well, I understood what Brother Mark's saying. I say it, and it gets taped and gets sliced and blurred, then you're kind of stuck. But when you begin to make spiritual applications in a New Testament sense, if you die outside the church, you die outside the city of refuge.
That's right.
People are like, well, they were headed that way, and, well, they were close, and I think the analogy has to stand. The refuge was in the city. You don't make it to the city,
Sure.
You're not protected, and that person's not held accountable for taking your life.
But I'm talking about the Avenger.
Yeah, I know what you.
Oh, okay.
I know what you're saying, and I believe that's true.
Okay.
But I think it has to be true, or else you negate what you find when you get to the city. It said if the Avenger pursues him in the city and tries to take his life, he's not going to be allowed to.
Right.
So the assumption is, if he gets him before then, he's not held accountable to the laws of the city of refuge. And so, that's the way I would see it, or else why have the city of refuge? You just say, an innocent person going to be protected until somebody can hear him. He says, you got to get there. And obviously also true is if somebody wasn't innocent, and that is they deliberately killed somebody, these folks were supposed to go to some effort to hear the cause and reason these things out. And if he killed him deliberately, he wouldn't be protected. The whole point of having the city and having the structure is to give that reasoning ability to say, we'll give a person that opportunity. Obviously, when you just leave it to humans, we're going to make some of those mistakes. But to say you can't have a system in place because sometimes innocent people might die is to let more innocent people die at the hands of those who would deliberately, consciously take life, have no respect for life. And I don't think God ever intended. We certainly know He didn't intend. You go back beyond the law to Genesis chapter 9, and He said, whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. Well, this is not just no Ten Commandment law. This is an ordained law of God. Said life is precious. And you said it shed innocent blood, there will be an account to pay. And if we don't pay it here, certainly we're going to pay it before God. But God expects us to have laws and order, and He expects that respect for life to be held high. And of course, we live in a time when, well, I don't need to go there. It's astounding, isn't it, that the same ones that stand with the signs, the protests, capital punishment, promote abortion. Isn't that just astounding? And the same people who politically in our nation say we're barbaric and we do things that are inhumane and putting people to death, whether it's lethal injection or electric chair. I won't even let you discuss the barbaric nature of taking the life of an unborn child. They say, oh, it's a scare tactic. It's not born yet. And so, it's not living yet. It's not, and they make all kinds of, isn't that such a quandary to be in? To stand for a person who made a conscious choice to take a life, and you're saying, I'll protect his life, just let him stay in prison, or let him go. He probably won't do it again. And you go into the womb of a mother and take the life of an innocent child. Something wrong with that picture, isn't it? Anyway, I don't need to go there any further because that gets a whole different subject. But it does indicate in this dividing up these strategic places of refuge that God respects life, but He also knows that accidental things can happen. And sometimes we can do that just in the struggle trying to protect ourselves. Sometimes we can. I lived out west 7 years on the western slope, and almost every hunting season, somebody shot someone else accidentally. They didn't intend to do that. And so those kind of things happen. But that's a good question, and it's always interesting to try to put it in our context and say, how does that apply to us? And how's God always looked at things? Most people want to go back and pin God with being cruel. But you see cities of refuge, it sounds just the opposite, doesn't it? Sounds like he's fair and just. He wants to build in that so we can be fair and just. All right, chapter 21. Cities are given to Levi. We've made mention of this already, that's what their inheritance was, is cities. 13 cities in the tribe of Judah. Simeon and Benjamin were given to the priest proper. Those descendants of Kohath are mentioned specifically, and so the heads of the fathers of the Levites came to Eleazar and the priest and to Joshua. Here's that representation of the spiritual leader and the civil leader, not meaning that Eleazar had nothing to do with the civil government, nor that Joshua had nothing to do with the spiritual side, just seeing the representation here and God ordaining the priestly tribe of Levi to carry out his bidding in those particular matters. And so they spake unto them in Shiloh in the land of Canaan, saying, the Lord commanded. Notice how they're going back and saying, the Lord commanded through Moses. So they haven't forgotten. They're assuming that Eleazar and Joshua hadn't forgotten, and they certainly know God hadn't forgotten. And so the Lord commanded by the hand of Moses to give us cities to dwell in, with the suburbs thereof for our capital. Not the first time we've heard that. But now the people are claiming that. And they're saying, okay, we're ready to have the cities. It was promised. We're here now. Everybody's getting their portion of land. Now where are our cities? And so the children of Israel gave unto the Levites out of their inheritance, at the command of the Lord, these cities and their suburbs. And the family of descendants of Kohath came, and these are the children of Aaron, the priest, and which were of the Levites, and they had their a lot out of the tribe of Judah, and Simeon and Benjamin. So it mentions these descendants of Levi. Remember, it's Kohath and Gershon, and it mentions all three of those sons in this context in the cities that they possessed. 13 cities, 10 cities of rest given to the descendants of Kohath and Ephraim and Dan and a half a tribe of Manasseh. Why just a half a tribe of Manasseh here?
They already got it.
All right, the other half's on the other side of the river. 13 cities for Gershon in Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and the half the tribe of Manasseh on the other side of the river. And so, again, in each of these tribes, they're having and the Nerites, the other son of is given 12 cities in Reuben, Gad, and Zebulun. So each of those priestly families are represented, and each of them gets cities as God commanded. And why record those specific reminders and those specific towns here? Why record those? They're in the land, and they've divided up the land. Now they're going to be living in the land. What's the priestly tribe about? They're representing God, in reference to carrying out the worship, and represent the people and bringing their sacrifices before God. And when you get to verse 34, rest of the Levites out of the tribe of Zebulun, it mentions those suburbs, they had to live. And their families are there. And all these tribes have this property. And the Levites are wandering around here saying, okay, where am I going to live? In this property. You can't just go pick out a city. They're promised to be given cities, but what cities are they? Haven't been named yet. So what happens if you say, this city I'm going to live in? What would the tribes say, you think? You're not going to live here. But what happens when you go before the officials, and Eleazar and Joshua, and the heads of the tribes, and they say, here's what Moses said, God said we were to have these cities. How are they going to do it? Well, they're going to try to be fair, and they're going to try to locate them so that all the tribes are represented in a priestly way, and that all the tribes share in providing the care for these priests. So there's some order to these things, and the Spirit records for us how they did it. And that everything that was said while Moses was alive and God spoke to Moses and to the people are being brought to bear here, and they're inhabiting this land. So they didn't just get over there and figure it out themselves. They go back to those laws that were given, those parameters that were set, and they're using those as a standard to live by. When you get to verse 43, you need to listen carefully. When you get to verse 43, the Lord gave unto Israel all the land which he sware to give unto their fathers, and they possessed it, and they dwelt therein. Did you hear what he said? The Lord gave unto Israel all the land which he sware to give unto their fathers, and they possessed it, and they dwelt therein. And the Lord gave them rest round about, according to all that he sware unto their fathers, and there stood not a man of all their enemies before them. And the Lord delivered all their enemies into their hand. And there fell not aught of any good thing which the Lord had spoken unto the house of Israel. All came to pass. You drop a peg there, it destroys every premillennial doctrine that's ever existed in those 3 verses. They're saying, well, you know, God hadn't kept his promise now to Israel, and so we better make sure we have the right relationship with Israel. And, you know, one of these days, when the Lord comes back, he's going to set up his kingdom in Israel, and so all that land is going to be brought back under their care, and so you better pay attention. No, you better pay attention. It said he kept all of his promise. We'll go back to Brother Brown's question earlier in reference to it saying, okay, you gave it to them, but now here are these enemies they still haven't driven out. So how can they possess it? See, they had the power. They're there. The enemies have been subdued. They just stopped short of killing them. So God kept his part. What would be lacking here? Man's part. The only reason they haven't killed those enemies, and the only reason they will eventually lose the land is because they didn't keep their part, not because God didn't keep his. He gave them the land. He empowered them to take it. So here we are, and boy, you need to highlight those verses in your Bible. And when people start making all kinds of proclamation, and unfortunately some of our brethren get caught up, how do you answer that? You know, I work with this friend, and they talk about Israel and the promise, and they read from a passage from Scripture. God said, all this land is going to be yours. How do you answer that? You think, read your Bible. That's how you answer that. I mean, really, you don't have to be rude or insult them, but when you start in Genesis chapter 1 and you get to this point, what is your impression of God? He always keeps his word. But he always expects man to keep his part. Everything he made in the garden was very good. He said, this is yours. The tree of life is here. You can eat of all the trees of the garden. But you can't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for the day you eat thereof, thou shalt surely die. Man had it made. What happened? Didn't obey God. And on you could go with every example. So here, just because the Israelites lost the land, doesn't mean God didn't keep his promise. They didn't do their part. Surely we've seen that in our study of Joshua up to this point. Surely we understand that. And so we can't miss what's being described to us. In chapter 22, we have the 2.5 tribes dismissed. What 2.5 tribes?
Reuben, Gad, half-tribe, Manasseh.
All right, that are on the eastern side of the Jordan. They came over to fight with their brethren, and so now the land divided. It said God gave them all the land, and they subdued their enemies. There's not anybody standing up against them. They're still in the land, some of them, because they've not killed them. But they're not, don't have power over them. And so they could have removed them. And so now that work is done. If you're not going to be fighting any more battles, why should these guys hang around? The fighting's over. I'll go back to my family. How about you? And that's what takes place here. Then Joshua called the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh and said unto them, Ye have kept all that Moses, thy servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice in all that I commanded you. You have not left your brethren these many days unto this day, but have kept the charge of the commandment of the Lord your God. Well, that's impressive, isn't it? I mean, they've been away from their families. They've been off at war. And they have kept their word all the way back to the passage in the book of Numbers when they made the request, can we live here on this side? We've already defeated these kings. And we're dwelling here right now. Can this just be our portion? And the answer was, yes, it can be, with this stipulation. You're going to have to cross Jordan and fight with your brethren. So they've done that. God kept His word. Their families are living in that land. Now, Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe Manasseh have kept their part. But here's a perfect example of God doing what He promised and man doing what He obligated himself to do. So, He said, and now the Lord your God hath given you rest, or given rest unto your brethren, as He promised them. Therefore now return ye, and get you to your own tents, and unto the land of your possession, with Moses the servant of the Lord gave you, which Moses the servant of the Lord gave you on the other side of Jordan. That must have been wonderful news, don't you think? You're going home. You're not just getting a furlough and got to come back. You're going home. You're done. You've served your tour of duty, and but take diligent heed to do the commandments and the laws which Moses, the servant of the Lord God, charged you, to love the Lord your God, and to walk in His ways, and to keep His commandments, and to cleave unto Him, and to serve Him with all your heart and with all your soul. Does that sound familiar? What did we start this study with in the book of Joshua? What are the ingredients of a successful life?
Faithfulness.
Faithfully serve the Lord. Keep His instructions for your life. And it'll turn out the way He said it would turn out. And He's reminding them, okay, the battle over here is over. You're going to go back to your homeland, but the requirements are still the same. You got to remember the commandments of the Lord. And the moral of that story is, no matter where we are, we're obligated to keep the commandments of the Lord. Sometimes we look over here, and we look over here, and we turn around and look behind us, and we never look up and say, wherever I am, the Lord knows where I am, and He knows what I ought to be doing. And so wherever I am, I'm going to keep the commandments of the Lord. So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went under their tents. Now we get this little wrinkle in everybody's brain among the children of Israel, and what happens with their return to their homeland. We get to the last part of this chapter, they'll build an altar. But here it says, and now the one-half tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given possession, Bashan, but unto the other half thereof gave Joshua among their brethren on this side of the Jordan, westward. And when Joshua sent them away also unto their tents, then he blessed them. He spake unto them, saying, return with much riches unto your tents, and with very much cattle, and silver, and with gold. Where did they get that? Well, they fought these battles with their brethren. They shared in the spoils. So all those 31 kings, you remember, that fell, those cities? They took the spoil and the cattle. Remember what's talking about that? So they divided that up among the tribes, and so these folks can go home and go have some happy wives and children, aren't they? They're not going to go home just all worn out and beaten down and broke, they're going to go home wealthy. You see, when you do what God tells you to do, the way God tells you to do it, you don't always prosper. In this sense, they received a physical land of promise, and they received physical prosperity, material prosperity. The same is true with us spiritually. We do what God tells us to do, we will have spiritual riches. See, ours will be, when we go home, described this way. How many funerals have you attended and heard this verse? I heard a voice from heaven saying, right. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord. Henceforth they shall rest from their labors, and their works do follow. Sound like a spiritual reward to you? When do you get that? When's the work done? When's the work done? When you die. How and where should you die? In the Lord. And so that's the context of these folks. They did the Lord's bidding. They went where the Lord told them to go. Now they're returning home, and they're returning home with their works following them. Aren't they? They have this, these spoils. They're divided from their enemies. And the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh returned and departed from children of Israel out of Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, to go into the country of Gilead, the land of their possession, whereof they were possessed according to the word of the Lord by the hand of Moses. And so you think, well, we've heard that. Why do you keep repeating that? Do you know how all the experts have concluded that we learn? You know, they say you need less information more often in a repetitive setting of application. And so, when these things are repeated over and over and over and over, we have less information repeated more often and placed in a setting where applications we made, and we see what the results are. Sometimes we can line out our year and preach lots of sermons and give people lots of information, when maybe we'd be more successful if we had less information and preached that more often and provide an opportunity for application. That's part of the reason at Cordova we said this year we're going to deal with mentoring and motivating the next generation. And because we've had gospel meetings and we've had other interruptions, that sounded negative. That's not negative. Those were celebratory kind of things, but you know that when you're, and I'm out here this week, so you know I haven't been able to preach every week, but every week that I preach, we highlight the same points and bring us up to the point of the day, so we don't forget what we're trying to accomplish here. And up on the screen in every sermon is those years involved in the next generation, beginning with our present year, 2009. You know, and a generation is measured from anywhere from 20 years to 40 years. And so we just kind of half that, not really half that, I suppose. We said 30 years because the congregation of Cordova was 30 years old in its existence. And so we're trying to say, where's the congregation going to be if the Lord spares our life 30 years from now? What would Bible knowledge level be? What would its leaders know? And what will we be doing for the Lord? We think, well, I'd be curious. I'd like to be around. Well, you can't be around. You can place in the lives and hearts of that present generation those truths that you know and that God has revealed to you, so you know what the next generation is going to be. So every sermon, here's these years placed up there. So we can't forget it. Because we're going to turn a few pages here, and it's going to say, there arose a generation that knew not Jehovah, nor the great work which he did. Anyway, didn't mean to wander off into that again, but when you get to this context and you see these folk keeping their word, and hi there, okay? We see these folks keeping their word, and we see God keeping his part of it, and so they're triumphantly preparing to go home, and being charged to not forget to keep the commandments of the Lord. They received this because of the proclamation of the Lord through Moses' hand, verse 9, and when they came unto the borders of Jordan, that are in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half-tribe Manasseh built there an altar by Jordan, a great altar to see to. You can just almost envision the children of Israel going about their activities, trying to, build their places to live and plant their crops and do all the things that need to be done. And the children of Israel heard say, behold, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and the half-tribe Manasseh have built an altar over against the land of Canaan, in the borders of Jordan, at the passage of the children of Israel. And when the children of Israel heard it, the whole congregation of the children of Israel gathered themselves together in Shiloh to go up to war against them. Boy, that's an immediate reaction, isn't it? The children of Israel sent unto the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half-tribe Manasseh in the land of Gilead, Phinehas the son of Eleazar the priest, and with him 10 princes of each of the chief house, a prince throughout all the tribes of Israel, and each one was a head of a house of their fathers among the thousands of Israel. And they came unto the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half-tribe Manasseh. Are you getting more information or less information more often? How many times it told you Reuben, Gad, and half-tribe Manasseh? You don't get confused who we're talking about here. So you're getting less information more often, but you get the picture, don't you? Yeah. These folks are supposed to be going home, and they pause, and they build an altar, and it gets the attention of their brethren. And so they're saying directly to these brethren, thus saith the whole congregation of the Lord, what? Trespass is this that you have committed against the God of Israel. Turn away this day from following the Lord, in that you have built you an altar, that you might rebel this day against the Lord. You see, Joshua's charge was, you remember the commandments of the Lord. You know what he said? And you love him with all your heart. What are they assuming happened here? That they built an idolatrous place.
Yes.
And look at what they remember. Is the iniquity of Peor too little for us, from which we are not clean until this day? Although there was a plague in the congregation of the Lord. They go back to Numbers chapter 25, and you remember when they were lured into adulterous, lascivious acts, and that plague and punishment was brought upon them by the Lord. And they said, have you not forgotten that? For us to enter into those kind of relationships and forget God and turn our back on him, we're not going to be a part of it. But that you must turn away this day from following the Lord, is it? And it will be, seeing ye rebel today against the Lord, that tomorrow you will be wroth. He will be wroth with the whole congregation of Israel. You see, they realize from past experience that when some of your brethren get caught up in sin, all of your brethren suffer. How many folks wandered in the wilderness? All of Israel. Why? Because some of the brethren were rebellious and faithless. So they get the picture. How many folks died at Peor? Well, thousands of folks died. And it affected every family in Israel. And so they're not about to have, now we just got settled in this land and you're going to do something like that? And they assume this was a rebellious act. Keep in mind, there's still foreigners in their land that they have not got up in arms against. These foreigners are idolatrous people. They make some assumptions here. This is an idolatrous act. This is a rebellion against God. You see, there's a tabernacle that had certain items in it that God sanctioned and God prescribed and God had a pattern for, and God said this is where the worship is going to take place. And it's not there. So what are they assuming? You build an altar, what are you going to do on the altar? You're going to offer sacrifices. And who authorized you to offer sacrifices there? And who's going to offer it for you? Who are these tribes? Reuben, Gad, and half-tribe Manasseh. They don't have the authority to offer sacrifices. So they're making some assumptions here. And, but they're riled up about it. They're ready to go to war with their own brethren. And that's impressive, and I think needful for them to get this cleared up. And if that had been the case, that they would remove their own brethren from the land and kill their own brethren for being rebellious. But what about those folks that they put in tribute?
Okay. He didn't care as much about them.
You know, they didn't get quite as riled up, did they? That, hey, they can be useful to us. So, a little confusion here on what's taking place. Notwithstanding, if the land of your possession is unclean, then pass you over unto the land of the possession of the Lord, wherein the Lord's tabernacle dwelleth, and take possession among us. But rebel not against the Lord, nor rebel against us, and build in you an altar beside the altar of the Lord our God. They're saying, okay, if you feel like you need to offer sacrifices because of your impurities on that side of the river, then just abandon that side of the river and come over here, and we've got a system in place to take care of that. Isn't that what they're saying? God has a system in place. He selected a tribe. He selected a means and mode through the altar that is represented at the tabernacle. And these priestly tribes and these high priests are going to offer those sacrifices for us. And what's that for? For our trespasses. And you don't have the authority to do that. And so if that's why you're doing it, you come on back over here. If living over there is creating a problem, then just come on over here. We've already got the system in place. According to whose direction? Whose altar? The altar of God. You see, everything about the tabernacle, God designed. He said, God didn't design that. You don't have a right to be building another altar. And did not Achan, the son of Zerah, commit trespass? Or they got a good memory? God's not going to tolerate rebellion. And we're not going to be part of it. Did they remember what it's like going against Ai when somebody sinned? 36 of their brethren died. They said, you're not going to cause us to insult God again. He committed a trespass in the accursed thing, and the wrath fell upon all the congregation. What are they saying? You're not going to sin here and us be accountable for it and do nothing about it. We're going to respond now. And the man, and that man perished, and that man perished not alone in his iniquity. And so Achan wasn't the only one that died. 36 of his brethren died, and his family died. And the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh answered and said unto the heads of the thousands of Israel, the Lord God of gods, the Lord God of gods, He knoweth, and Israel He shall know. And if it be in rebellion, or if it in transgressions against the Lord, save us not this day, that we have built us an altar to turn from the fallen God, or if to offer their own burnt offerings or meat offerings, or if to offer peace offerings their own, let the Lord Himself require it. And if we have not rather done it for fear of this thing, saying, in time to come your children might speak unto our children, saying, what have you to do with the Lord God of Israel? For the Lord hath made Jordan a border between us and you, you children of Reuben, you children of Gad. You have no part in the Lord. So shall your children make our children cease from fearing the Lord. Therefore we have said, let us now prepare to build us an altar, not for burnt offerings, nor for sacrifice, but that it may be a witness between us and you, and our generation after us, that we might do the service of the Lord before Him with our burnt offerings and with our sacrifices and with our peace offerings, that your children may not say to our children in time to come, you have no part in the Lord. Therefore, say we, that it shall be when they should say to us, or to our generation in time to come, that we may say again, behold the pattern of the altar of the Lord, which our fathers made, not for burnt offerings, not for sacrifices, but it is a witness between us and you. God forbid that we should rebel against the Lord and turn this day from following the Lord, to build an altar for burnt offerings, for meat offerings, and for sacrifices beside the altar of the Lord our God, that is before the tabernacle. again, we've got less information more often. It's been repeated about 4 times in this section, hasn't it? That's not what we built it for, and here's what we did build it for. What are some things that you see immediately before we see Phinehas and the congregation answer their brethren? What do you see as some breakdown in communication here? Where were they earlier in the chapter before they went home? Who were they standing before? Joshua and Eleazar and the heads of the family. What did they say then? Okay, here's what we were thinking. We've been over here a long time. We've possessed that land over there a long time. And we're going to go back home. And there's that Jordan River between us. You think that's going to be a problem? What happens with generations to come? I think those are legitimate concerns. But why didn't they take them up with their brethren before they left if they were that deep concerned? Why did they wait until they got off south just before they crossed the Jordan River and said, this could be a real problem?
Makes you think maybe they were coming up with that idea along the way.
Yeah, it does kind of make you think they were contemplating, okay, now we're going home, the battle's over. We've got to leave our brethren. You kind of get attached to folks over here, and our children will not have experienced that. And their children will not have experienced us fighting with them and for them. So in years to come, what might happen? Well, we're going to be a pretty great distance away from the tabernacle, and so maybe we just built one like it. Our children ask us about it, we can say, well, there's one, that we've always been required to offer. I guess you can see some reasons why they would do it, but you can also see grave dangers. And you're impressed that there seemed to be an immediate response. But this is clear in the minds of the Israelites. We're not going to have that experience again. And we're not going to sit by and no trespass is taking place. And so they're having some real strong conversation here. But also keep in mind, they've got sin right under their nose. And they run right past it. And to go catch up with their brethren and say we're not going to tolerate it. So when Phinehas the priest and the princes of the congregation, the heads of the thousands of, we'll finish this chapter and we'll take a break in case you wonder. And the princes of the congregation, the heads of the thousands of Israel, which were with him, heard the words that the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the children of Manasseh spake. It pleased them. Phinehas the son of Eleazar, the priest, said unto the children of Reuben, the children of Gad. Did you not already know that, who they're talking to? Just don't want you to misunderstand. And to the children of Manasseh, this day we perceive that the Lord is among us, because you have not committed this trespass against the Lord, nor now yet ye have delivered the children of Israel out of the hand of the Lord. In other words, I don't see the Lord getting angry at what you just described, and so we're glad you didn't do something that would have cost your brethren to have to suffer, because the Lord had been angry. And Phinehas the son of Eleazar the priest and the princes returned from the children of Reuben and from the children of Gad out of the land of Gilead unto the land of Canaan to the children of Israel, and brought them word again. And this thing pleased the children of Israel, and the children of Israel blessed God and did not intend to go up against them in battle to destroy the land wherein the children of Reuben and Gad dwelt. What were they going to do? They were going to destroy the land where the children of Reuben and Gad dwelt. The children of Reuben and Gad and children called the altar Ed, for it shall be a witness between us and the Lord that the Lord is God. So they were going to go up and destroy their brethren. What were they told to do about their enemies? Destroy them. Well, they got iron chariots. Well, I guess you could say that Reuben and Gad, half tribe of Manasseh, didn't have time to build iron chariots, but they were people of war. And they just built an altar. And they were going to cross the river. They aren't going to be a threat to you. But they're reacting. So we learned some things here that's helpful to us to get a perspective. Joshua charges them before they leave to do the law and to love God and serve God. And he charges them to follow God wholly, not forget how God blessed them, and they return with a great amount of spoils, and so all life is good. They're going home, and that's good. And on their way, they do something that's foolish. They didn't really have reason. Again, when they were all together, they could have said, let's consult God and say, is there anything else we need to do before these people go home? Couldn't they have? And couldn't, if they had questions, they could have addressed that to Joshua, and those things could have been taken care of, but much like we do today, we make some decisions that affect us for years to come, and we could have just paused and said, is this a good decision? Will this help us accomplish the will of the Lord? And a little insight here, Phinehas starts coming to the front. Eleazar is among that generation with Joshua and Caleb. And so they're all getting older, new people. Othniel steps forward and kind of stands out in place of Caleb. And now you have Phinehas stepping forward out of the shadow of Eleazar. It kind of gives you some glimpse into those of the next generation that represent the civil government and the religious matters. And that's significant. All right, he said I could pause this, so we'll try it.